My middle daughter and her family love to go camping. She has two little boys, ages 4 and 6, and they just love it. Me, no thank you. I did enough camping when I was in junior high and high school. Our little Boy Scout troop would go on monthly campouts where we'd sleep on the ground and in tents, and it was fun. It was really, really good fun. I think the last time that I camped out, which to me equals I slept in a tent, was back when it was actually the very first Promise Keepers event that I went to, and that would have been about 1991. Man, I just can't hardly do it. No, that's not true. I could do it. I just would whine and complain. I'm just not a tent guy. But yeah, on the other hand, I probably am a tent guy, whether I want to be or not. Especially when I think about the tent in the context that Peter writes about it in 2 Peter chapter 1. We looked at verse 12 last time. I'm going to pick it back up there. So I will always remind you of these things, even though you know them and are firmly established in the truth you now have. I think it is right to refresh your memory as long as I live in the tent of this body. There we go. The tent of this body. And I talked a little bit about the tent of this body last time. Just don't forget that the tent represents a temporary dwelling. This is not our permanent abode. I get so caught up, and I think most people get caught up without even meaning to, as though what we see here is permanent. And what I am and what I'm doing is permanent. It's not. This is all temporary. Well, see, if it is all temporary, as I think it is, and Peter indicates, then we have to have a certain kind of mentality toward these temporary things. I read, I don't even remember who wrote it, but it was in a book about if you stop along the way on a journey at a hotel, how silly would it be to haul in your own furniture, rearrange the paintings on the wall, change the color of the paint, and then move on the next day? You wouldn't do that. That'd be silly. Why? Because it's a temporary stop. We must not let ourselves get lulled into a lie. The lie being this is permanent, because it's not. Doesn't most everything kind of give you the clue? As I'm recording this, in mid-October, the leaves are beginning to change, and it won't be very many weeks before they fall clear off the trees. And that's a change. That then the trees will be barren for all of winter, and then in the spring they'll begin to bud and then blossom and then bloom. And things will green up again, and I'll have to start mowing the lawn again, and on it goes. And isn't that's a graphic reminder that we are in this temporary cycle of life. We cannot treat this tent as though it were our final permanent home, because it's not. And if we get wrapped up too tightly around the axle of this life, we miss so much. Well, Peter says, I am going to, as long as I'm in the tent of this body, I'm going to keep refreshing your memory about a godly life, what it looks like, how it can be described, and how it's lived. I want that to be, if it's not the very first bullet point on my job description, I want it to be the second, maybe third at the least. I want, as long as I am living in the tent of this body, I want to be like Peter to say, I will always remind you of what it looks like to live a godly life, how a godly life can be described, and then how do you step into that? How do you build these character qualities of a godly life into your life, stacking, building one upon the other? He says, as long as I live in the tent of this body. There is one last thing I want to say about the tent of this body before we move on. I think there are a lot of Christians who they treat their tent as though it were permanent, number one. And the second thing is some of us are very poor stewards of this tent. We don't take care of it very well. And I'm not just talking about the spiritual aspects of our earthly life, but I'm talking about the physical aspects. What we eat and don't eat, and drink and don't drink, the exercise we get and don't get, the patterns of our lives, the things that we do are often not very thoughtful. And I believe that part of our charge, having been given this tent, is to take care of it. I shared last time that in the last 10 years, it's really come front and center to me that if I want to have a lasting, long-term impact, I'm going to have to live. I need to do what I can to ensure that the tent of my body is in as good a shape as it can be so that I can continue. I want to be just some of the basics. I love my wife and I love being married to her. I want my physical health to be such that at some point, I know I'm going to become a burden to her. I mean, that's just the cycle of life, isn't it? But I don't want that to come too early. I love my kids and my grandkids, and I love being a papa and a dad. And I want to do that as long as I can and have meaningful input, loving, encouraging input into their lives for as long as I can. I would so love to be able to be at my granddaughter's wedding and hold her first child and maybe all of her kids. That won't happen accidentally. It will happen in my life, I'm convinced, if I steward my physical health well. Now, there are people who don't know beans about Jesus, and they don't care to know beans about Jesus, who take really good care of their tent. And they will probably live a very long time. That's how it works, folks. But those of us who do know beans about Jesus, we have even a greater reason, a bigger, stronger, bigger reason to take care of the tent, so that the impact of our testimony, the witness of our life, can be extended through time for a longer period. Be careful. Now, don't become obsessed. Kind of people who they kind of are like calorie police and nutrition gurus, and they are always telling about all the things that you should or shouldn't do or eat or so forth. They get on my nerves. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about have a sane approach to your health. When I look at my health, I have issues. Boy, have I got issues. But I do have a couple of significant health issues. And if I pretend that they don't exist, there's a pretty strong odd that these, particularly two things, I have heart disease and I have type 2 diabetes, which can easily become full-on type 1 diabetes, where my system is no longer just okay, now, come on, brain, don't fail me now. Insulin resistant. Wow, what a brain belch. Insulin resistant, but it will cease making insulin at all. And if that happens, I am shortening my life. And there are things I can do to keep that from happening. So I don't know what your physical health is like. There are things you can't do anything about. In that case, to be a good steward means to manage whatever you have and to do the best you can with managing that. That's all I'm saying. And I probably spent too many words on it. Peter doesn't seem to be too wrapped up in this whole thing of I've got to be healthy, I've got to live a long time. And part of the reason is because he kind of got some insight that most of us are not going to get. In verse 14, well, picking it up, I think it's right for me to refresh your memory. As long as I live in the tent of this body, because I know that I will soon put it aside, as our Lord Jesus Christ has made clear to me. Wow. I really don't know anybody personally who has been able to know when they will put that tent aside. I think we all intuitively know at some point in time we're going to die. And for Christians, we have this other thing that if Jesus returns before I die, then that's the end of my life. We're stepping into eternity. But if he, the old phrase, if Jesus tarries, if he doesn't return, then I'll die, and that'll be the end of my life. And most of us are not going to get this kind of specific insight into when that time will be. I have observed and stood by with families by the bedside of one who is dying, folks who knew the end was near, but they didn't know. I don't know that any of them really knew when they were going to fold the tent and move on. But Peter evidently did. It's an advantage that he had that we won't have. I think we can safely say I'm probably not going to get that particular insight. I read a thing on Facebook, and I know there are times when Facebook, I just want to throw the whole thing out because it's just such a waste of time. But every once in a while, I run across something that resonates because it's true and worthy. This was one. It said, time and money, and I'm making a big paraphrase of it, but it said time and money are similar in that you can only spend them once. But they're different in this. You know how much money you have, but you do not know how much time you have. I wonder how different my life would be, how different your life would be if we approached every day with a sense that if this is my last day, I want it to count. Now, that's pretty morbid, and you could take that to a very unhealthy extreme. But what if today was the last day of your life? How differently would you live it? How different would your priorities be? How shifted would they be? I can tell you, for me, one of the big things is I would be much, much, much more intentional about loving the people in my life. I would be much more intentional about sensing my connection with God and nurturing it. I think I would probably be a lot less worried about, can I say it? Because as I'm recording this, the train has gathered almost all the speed it's going to gather for this election of 2020. And if this were the last day of my life, honestly, all of the political stuff wouldn't matter to me. It would be, it's whatever. This is it for me. So there's some things, some ways that if we truly believed that the tent, the tent of this body, this life, our span is discrete. We don't know when it's going to end, but what if it is today? I want to be found faithful, and I would want you to want the same thing. Well, my time's up, more than up. I'm going to close. I hope we get to connect this way next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.